A couple of things.
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 Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of A Couple of Things, a potpourri of my mind. Potpourri. So, this episode is basically about why the podcast, the name, the history, and all these other questions that people have asked me in the time since I started talking about creating a podcast. I'm also going to talk a bit about how to separate your why and how to separate your identity from your job. So, why the name A Couple of Things? A Couple of Things is a very random name that came to me about 7 months ago when I was starting a newsletter. My newsletter was about me writing random things, so I decided to name it A Couple of Things. So, where the potpourri of my mind part came from was from a blog I started many years ago while I was still in high school. The name of the blog was called Out of My Head, a potpourri of my mind. So while I was trying to create the logo for the podcast in Canva, I stumbled upon the very old banner I designed for the website's banner. And I saw it had a potpourri of my mind. I had totally forgotten about this, but I felt like it sounded nice, especially because it added something to the name, A Couple of Things, which is very popular for podcasts apparently. So that's how I came about the combined title, A Couple of Things, a potpourri of my mind. And the reason why it's not just called a potpourri of my mind is simply because it didn't look nice on the banner when I was designing it. A couple of things look nicer, and so I just stuck with it. So, what is the podcast? It's a bite-sized podcast, so maximum of 10 to 15 minutes. It will probably always be shorter than that because really nobody wants to listen to an hour-long podcast. The things are going to be covering my personal life, my work, literature, pop culture, and basically anything I find interesting. And people have asked me why didn't I like separate them and not just put it in one place. First of all, managing podcasts is stressful. Even like recording this one episode was so stressful. This is like the third take that you're listening to now. And I can't imagine doing that for 4 or 5 different podcasts covering all my interests and things that I want to talk about. So I'm just going to put all of it in one place. Each episode will be labeled based on the major theme for the episode, so that if you're not really interested in the design stuff, you can listen to other things. And if it's just the design stuff you're here for, you can also focus on that as well. Another reason is because I recently hosted a Women in Desire series for the African Tech Woman podcast, and I really enjoyed doing it. And so I felt like the stress will be worth it because this is so much fun to do and to have people listen and share their feedback. Everyone is well, maybe not everyone, but most people are multifaceted and they don't just do one thing. So I have multiple interests. Why do I need to separate all of those things into different places and put them in different corners when I can just like share my entire person through the podcast? So it's a design podcast, it's a personal podcast, it's a podcast about literature and pop culture and everything in between. Ultimately, it's a personal place for me to share my thoughts, opinions, experiences about anything and everything I consider to be interesting, answering questions from people, and so on. So I'm very excited to hear back from people. And thanks to the voice message feature on Anchor, it makes it very easy to do that. And I can feature your message in the podcast. So the intro you heard with a couple of things was from 5 different people who sent in a clip of them saying a couple of things. So on the topic of having multiple interests and being multifaceted, people often say that, oh, you should just do one thing, be one thing. So, like, if you're a writer, be a writer and don't be anything else, or don't project yourself to be anything else. And some people even say, if you're a writer, don't just be a writer that focuses on X topic alone. And I feel like, okay, if that's what you want, if that's what you think that you're comfortable with and what you're good at, that's fine. But I feel like most people have multiple interests, and I don't think that it is good to ask people to close the door to their other interests or to lock out things that they're interested in just because it feels too much to other people. And the question is, it feels too much to who? If Aristotle can be in philosophy classes and political science classes and psychology classes and in all these other areas, and people are doing so many different things and excelling at them, why can't I as well if that is what I want to do? Which is not to say you have to become that person if that's not who you are. But if that's who you are, then explore the things that you're interested in. Of course, at different times, you won't be able to do everything at the same time, and you prioritize some things over others at different times. But it doesn't mean that you should totally neglect an area of yourself that you want to explore. Something I hear a lot is that when you do many things, it's hard to define who you are. But why is that a problem? Why must I define myself by my day job? So is my whole identity now going to be UX researcher or experience designer or service designer because that's what I do in my job? My job is not my identity. My identity is not rooted in being a researcher or a designer or working in tech. My identity is outside of that. And I guess that's why I don't worry too much about like what I do in my 9 to 5. I'm good at what I do. I'm good at my job. I put all my energy into doing the best work that I can do. But I define myself by who I am. I don't know, that might not make sense, but it's very hard. Like, how do you define yourself if you don't define yourself with your job? What happens if your job that you do suddenly goes out of existence and it's not something that people do anymore? What then will become your identity? What happens if you find something new that you enjoy doing? Would you ignore that just because you have defined yourself by this job that you do? So, for example, I studied psychology in university and I had planned on going the academia route and going to do a PhD and all of that. But somewhere along the line, I got the opportunity by a total series of random accidents to become a UX researcher. And I took it and I explored it, and it has worked out great for me. And I've been doing this for almost 4 years. And who knows, in another 3 4 years I might be doing something else, or I might still be doing UX research. I don't know, nobody knows, maybe only God knows. And it wasn't in my plan. So if I had defined myself and my identity as, oh, I am an academic and I am going to be an academic and do a PhD, that would have caused me to this opportunity where I'm able to work with a lot of large companies. I've worked with InterSwitch, I've worked with Google, I've done things that I'm enjoying, the things that I am doing. I will not have been able to explore and discover this new side. Or if I had done that, I would have started with like an identity crisis because it's like, oh my God, this is not who I am. So when you discover something new, it's great to be able to explore and to remove your identity and self-worth from the job that you do. And you can't plan for every single career path. Facebook has a role called the head of faith-based partnerships. How can you plan your life? The person who's there, I'm very, very sure that 10, 15 years ago, she never even imagined that this is what she'll be doing with her life. You can't plan for something like that. I don't think you can, at least. So even with the podcast, I have a plan for it to be long term. But if as I go on, I see that this is not valuable to me, it's not valuable to the people who are listening, or nobody's finding value in it, then I will have to end it, and I'll be fine with that, because it's like me exploring something new and seeing whether it works out or not. And it is totally okay if it doesn't work out. And I won't feel like I have lost a part of myself or lost who I am. So that's it for today. Thank you for listening. Please send me your feedback on Twitter, Instagram, or by sending a voice message, leaving a comment, and share this with other people if you enjoyed listening to it. Thank you for listening once again, and I will post another episode on Thursday. That will be a design focused episode. Bye.